Welcome back to The Heat. We're talking about expectations after Donald Trump takes office as President of the United States next year. What impact might that have on China's global leadership on areas from trade to climate change? Also joining us now from Shanghai is Victor Ai. He is an international commentator and former television host with CCTV's Spanish channel. Welcome to you, Victor. Let me start with you. Let's move on to another major international issue, and that is climate change. A news magazine here in the United States, Salon, recently ran a headline which said, China will soon trump America. The country is now the leader in climate change reform. I don't know whether that was meant as a pun there, but with Trump raising questions about his commitment to the Paris Accord on climate change, what will China's role be in implementing this accord, which was signed by nearly 200 countries?
Okay, Anand, thank you very much for having me. I think climate change is a huge topic, but also an essential topic for everyone. I don't care what Donald Trump, the new elected president of the United States, said, to the public or to the audience or to the media, if it is a hoax or something that the Chinese government made up, lots of years ago to cover the China's development, and others, it's probably a conspiracy. I think it is a reality that everyone should facing it right now. It is not just an agreement between the two governments, China and the United States government fighting against each other for a future development. It is something, some people say it is a renaissance for all human beings, because all the governments have sat down for 40 years, negotiating, talking, fighting, disputing for this agreement. It's so-called the climate change or Paris Agreement. And now, as you have said, there are more than 200 countries have signed on this paper, which means it is an agreement for human beings.
Right, and Wenping, that was a point that was made by a Chinese newspaper, Global Times, which said that if Washington withdraws from the Paris climate deal, China will stick to its commitment, yet it won't be able to make up for the loss that's incurred by the US. So how difficult will it be for China to lead on climate change without the United States?
Yeah, if U.S. Is out of this campaign, I think, of course, this is a big loss for United States as well, and a big damage for U.S. Global reputation. But of course, China will continue to make our promise to be made. And also, I think, of course, we start the partnership with the United States, and China's China's contribution to this global fight with climate change will be more difficult, that's for sure, because the U.S. is still the superpower in the world. It has the, the financial means and also the technical know-how. All of that are most advanced in our planet. So we start this partnership. China's this contribution, this fighting for the climate change will be difficult. But even though it is difficult, but China will not make a U-turn like U.S. has done, will do in the next administration. So I think partner with other 200 countries has already made their assignment, and then partner with them, with European countries, even with African countries. I have to mention that even ever since the 2009, that FOCAC meeting, that is the Forum China-African Cooperation meeting, and China has already made a promise to help African countries to establish like as many as 100 those clean energy projects. So that's a big commitment for this climate change issue.
Okay, PJ, here we had the United States and China. They were front and center when this deal was being thrashed out in Paris. I think it's fair to say that when the legacy of the Obama administration is written, this will feature pretty high up. Yet now we have Trump who's threatening to unravel all of this. In fact, if you look at the transition team, there's 9 senior members who are climate change skeptics in that team.
Absolutely. Now we'll see what they actually do once they make the transition to being responsible as the president and his national security team. I don't think any decision that I think confronts Mr. Trump would have more devastating consequences to American leadership, than if it assertively tries to withdraw from the Paris Accord. I think it's more likely that they'll probably just slow the pace of initiative. They won't pull out, but they're not necessarily going to put a lot of oomph behind the climate accord. I mean, that said, on the one hand, the private sector is no longer debating this issue, and so even if the government remains ambivalent, there's going to be room for initiative at the state level, room for initiative in the private sector. So the United States could still well meet its obligations, but I certainly don't think that this is something that's going to be a key pillar of a Trump foreign policy. But just to reflect on my colleagues, I mean, this is for China there's been a remarkable leap, if you will, right, from the Chinese position at the Copenhagen conference that I attended in 2009, where China still had this question, we're a developing country and this is a developed world problem. And there you see that, just within a relatively short space of time, China has become a leader on climate. I think the Chinese leadership sees this as a question of critical political legitimacy in terms of its own relationship with its people. I also think that China rightfully sees that, this may be a good policy space and it's a good economic space. And so, China has taken off in terms of pursuing technology and believes that it can make money from this, and that's advantageous.
Right, enormous domestic significance for China, this deal. Sourabh, here we have a good example of global governance, yes, the Paris Accord. How important is it for countries like China and the United States to cooperate in pushing a deal like this?
Oh, I think it's very important because, as all the panelists have talked, climate change is real and it is a serious threat to the planet. It is also an area where countries have been able to display their soft power and their global engagement, their role in global engagement, by taking on important commitments. Just to move away for 1 second from US and China, for example, India, which has typically played hardball on a lot of fronts on multilateral negotiations. It has usually had a very harsh divide on North-South positions and has usually been very strong on South-South positions in multilateral venues, particularly in the area of international trade and international economics. The Modi government itself has taken some pretty strong steps in favor of being a good international citizen by taking on fairly onerous commitments as part of the Paris Agreement. And as he had mentioned, at Copenhagen, the Indians had been ambivalent at that point of time, and not as ambivalent as China perhaps at Copenhagen, but nevertheless, India has taken on pretty strong commitments. So this is an area to show to display soft power and to show your international engagement, and therefore, the presidential campaign out here, U.S. soft power has already taken a beating from the sordid nature and the tone of that campaign, and this would be a huge loss in that department, in the soft power department, if Trump were to remain the skeptic that he has shown to be. But I would also say he has at some point, he says a lot of things, but he's attuned to reality, and I think he is not the person that he might necessarily have wanted to display that he is, and let's just have a little hope.
He met with Al Gore.
Exactly. Sure.
Victor, let's look at some other issues where there is a possibility of cooperation between China and the United States. Cybersecurity and fighting terrorism. How important is that moving forward?
Well, these are very hot topics and important topics between China and the U.S. Cyber internet, it's been a conflict, or in the media are talking about the conflicts between China and the U.S. We're fighting against each other. You have hackers, I have hackers, but it's a small picture. Let's see the bigger picture. Okay, we're fighting against the internet crimes, from both countries, because U.S. invented the internet and China is the biggest, user of internet, and we both put a lot of money and talent people into this industry, and we want this industry to be safe and secure and could be used, for all the benefits of the whole world. That's why I think China and the U.S. are facing the same challenge. That's why we need to work together. In terms of the terrorism, I think that is not a question anyway, especially after the 2001's 9/11 accidents. The terrorism has been a huge thing, not just for U.S., but also for China. And now you have seen a huge damage and a crisis that is happening in European countries. So China and the US must, and they have to cooperate with each other with exchanging information and cooperation in police and armed police and in every level they need to talk.
Right. PJ, as we said in the introduction, you've been a senior diplomat of the State Department here in Washington. This week, we learned that Trump's pick for Secretary of State will be the CEO of ExxonMobil, Rex Tillerson. His choice for ambassador to China will be Terry Branstad. What do you make of those selections?
I think there's a logic behind both of them. Mr. Tillerson, for example, has a world perspective. If you're the CEO of a major multinational corporation like ExxonMobil, you have been a diplomat, you've done deals. And he obviously has a relationship with Vladimir Putin. Terry Branstad, as governor of Iowa, has known President Xi for a long time. They have a rapport. And he has a perspective in terms of the importance of Chinese investment, at the state and local level. I think they're both interesting choices. It's interesting that there's a different context here. That on the one hand, Mr. Trump has blasted China on trade issues through Twitter, and yet the area of always going to be points of friction between the United States and China, but the areas of mutual interest appear to be expanding. Mr. Trump has said favorable things about trying to reset relations yet again with Russia, and yet there, the areas of common interest between the United States and Russia appear to be narrowing. So it will be interesting to see if he actually has these, at least his rhetoric during the transition, somewhat backwards.
And Terry Branstad was called an old friend by China, which symbolically is quite an accolade from Beijing. Wenping, I've got a little time left, and if we look at a broad question here, if China is to adopt more of a leadership role in international affairs, will we see a change in style, perhaps more of an emphasis on diplomacy?
Actually, that's a trend. Now we see China is playing more and more important role in international stage, and also. But I think China is still in the process of learning, being a global power. So far, we are not at that point saying we can take the full responsibility being the global leader. I don't think so, because we're just beginning to learn this, how to assume those responsibility, global responsibility. But we are in that direction. You can see China now not only get involved in those development contribution for those global south, and also playing this role in like a peacemaking, peace building, and peacekeeping in those war-torn area. We are sending more and more peacekeepers in Africa. So we are also getting involved in those Middle East issue. So like bring Palestine and Israel leaders to China, trying to negotiate with the peace building. So we are learning. So this global responsibility is in the process of building, and even the I think citizens, those education is still underway.